Merry met, virtual traveller, and welcome to Stories from Lore, a podcast that invites you to rewild yourself through story by exploring nature, folklore, and the stories it inspires. My name is Dawn Nelson, and I'm an author and professional storyteller. Well, it's been a while. As many of you will know, I've been away completing a year's contract working full-time with the South Downs National Park. It was a great opportunity and I really enjoyed the year, but now I'm back to freelance life and I'm hoping I can bring you folklore and stories more regularly, starting with the long-awaited second episode of Season 4. The theme for this episode is Strawberries Fair. But before I get started, there's just a couple of little housekeeping things that I'd like to bring you up to date with. Some of you may remember that I had a Patreon available for followers, but that I made the decision to close this down while I completed the aforementioned contract. I have in fact moved across to Substack, and I know many of you have followed me there, but if you haven't yet, if you'd like to follow it, the Substack's called Cerridwen's Cauldron, and I'll place a link in the show notes for you. Why Substack? Well, on Substack, I can provide a free newsletter, host this podcast, and I can provide a membership platform which has extras for paid subscribers. If you're interested in that, subscriptions are just £5 a month. That's less than a pint at your local, depending on where you live, of course. But I do hope that you will consider hopping over there to subscribe as either a free or paid subscriber in order to support the podcast and my work with stories and folklore. On the podcast front, each episode in Season 3 had a folk song with it, but I've decided not to include these in further episodes of the podcast. I really love learning and singing folk songs, but it does take time, so I've decided I will save those for when I can do them justice. For now, admin out of the way, for this episode, I'm exploring the folklore of the humble strawberry, both wild and propagated, with lashings of cream and perhaps a scone or two. Let's begin. Grab yourself a cuppa, find a comfy spot, and travel with me to a bell tent named Buzzard in Wales, where earlier this year I was having a morning cup of coffee and breakfasting on fresh strawberries. I'm sitting on the lovely porch of a 4-metre bell tent at Cumfroth campsite in the Brecon Beacons, Cumfroth Farm. It's my lovely storytelling friend, Pridey's campsite and farm and family home. And on the way here, when I got off the train, we went to a little local food store. And I bought the most delicious strawberries. They're deep red and they taste so sweet. And I am enjoying the view of the Black Mountains. In the evenings, I'm told, at the very end of that spur, the sun goes down behind it. So hopefully while I'm here I'll get to see that. But for now, I'm enjoying my breakfast with these wonderful strawberries. It's a magnificent view and a very quaint little kettle. I've just boiled some water on to make me a cup of coffee. These strawberries are indeed strawberries fair. Friday did tell me which mountain that was in front of me, but I can't for the life of me remember. I'm pretty good, as you guys know, at the Welsh names within the stories that I tell, but remembering the names of the landscape is something that I'm yet to master. Of course, the Brecon Beacons is now known as Benai Breceniog.
a renaming of an ancient landscape to encourage connection and custodianship. Of course, connection and custodianship is what it's all about. And my friend Pridey, who has lived here and slept out in the wilds in this landscape, knows it so well and knows all the names for it. And she's rooted in it, has her own names for it. And that's what it is to be a part of the land.
Strawberry season in the UK runs from May to early September. Of course, these are the propagated strawberries that you get in punnets in supermarkets, and you can buy at pick-your-own-farms. They start watery, and as the season moves on, they fill out and ease into a sweeter, fuller flavour, until the end of August, when they turn quickly and dissolve into a too-sweet mush in the bottom of the punnet. The parson naturalist, Gilbert White, mentions planting pine and chili strawberries in his 1755 journals. In an attempt to work out what varieties he was growing, I did a little bit of research and found that pine berries are smaller than more common varieties of strawberries, so this may have been what he meant by pine strawberries. The second are perhaps actually strawberries from Chile as opposed to strawberries that taste like chilies. They would have been available to Gilbert as he was a keen gardener with plenty of connections with which to swap plants and specimens. But where did they come from if they are Chilean? Well, here's an interesting bit of history about the strawberry. Amédée François Fraisier was a French military engineer, mathematician, spy and explorer who lived from 1682 to 1773, a contemporary of Gilbert's who was writing in 1755 in his journal. Fraisier was the first to bring back specimens of the chili species of strawberry, and he is best remembered for bringing back 5 specimens of Fragaria chileensis, also known as the beach strawberry or Chilean strawberry. If you heard me say that surname, Fraisier, and think, well, that's very reminiscent of the French word for strawberry, frais, well, it's very unlikely that that French word had anything to do with Fraisier's nomenclature. However, he is firmly embedded in the history of the strawberry, and it is him we have to thank for the deep, red, plump fruit we now find on our supermarket shelves. These are a cross between 2 species hailing from the Americas. Of course, we grow strawberries in this country, and you can buy UK-grown strawberries with ease when they are in season, but they are, of course, descendants of these Chilean strawberries. It is the wild or alpine strawberry that is our native species here in the UK, although even this tiny jewel was not here until the Romans introduced it. John Wright, in his book, The Forager's Calendar, notes that the tiny wild strawberry is now considered near threatened in England, as it isn't really found in very many truly wild places. Going back to the subject of the French word frais, which is the word for strawberry in French, the Fraser clan of Scotland may well have links to strawberries too. I have Scottish heritage, and the clan I am linked to through my grandfathers is the Frasers. It is said that they were French strawberry pickers, and there's a strawberry on some of the clan symbols. However, this is a bit of a romantic story about where the clan may have come from. Others argue that they weren't strawberry pickers at all, but that the fray instead refers to defresel, which means ribbon or braids. So we either skipped through the fields of strawberries or danced around a ribboned maypole. Who knows? Such is the wonder of the languages of the British Isles, and, of course, our surnames. Either way, they did hail from France. For some, the first strawberry of the season should always be given to the birds, and this certainly happens in our garden. When the little wild strawberries start to grow, we always make sure we leave some for our feathered and furred friends. I took great delight this year in watching a little mouse nibble away at a tiny strawberry or 2 before moving on to the yarrow. Each year, the perfectly formed wild strawberry flowers appear, 5 tiny white petals that eventually give way to green and then red fruits that are no bigger than your little fingernail. They herald the arrival of summer, and there are very few that remain by the end of August, as they have been feasted on by ourselves and the animals that frequent our garden. Although they can last much longer than this, and in some cases they can go on to be growing in December even. By August, though, it is time for their larger cousins to shine in their straw beds on the pick-your-own farms. This year was a very wet summer, and therefore a difficult year for strawberry growing, as they sit close to the ground and rot easily with too much rain. Some think that the name strawberry comes from the fact that they sit on these straw beds. However, it is also thought that the name comes from the Anglo-Saxon words stray and berry. The stray is a word that describes a wandering, so to stray. It's a wandering quality of something that has runners, and you'll find a lot of runners on wild strawberries, and they certainly enjoy a good meander across the garden. So it is that it was possible that the Anglo-Saxons called these little tiny wild strawberries stray berries. Not only are they delicious in jam, decorating cakes and scones, and in summer puddings and trifles, but they also crop up in folk medicine. Strawberry leaf tea is supposed to be a very good cure for diarrhoea, but apparently some can be allergic to the leaves, so best to check you're not first, or a bad stomach might actually be the least of your worries. On the subject of strawberry leaves, a duke's coronet, known as a ducal coronet, is adorned with 8 strawberry leaves, which indicates their rank. I can't find a definitive reason as to why this is, but perhaps in days gone by they all had a persistent problem with stomach bugs. Who knows? Hopefully that's not a treasonous thing to ponder. Or it could be that there is a link to the 3 parts of the strawberry leaf as representative of the Holy Trinity in the Christian religion. And strawberries often grow at the feet of the Virgin Mary in paintings depicting her. And if you do a little bit of research around the subject, it's not long before you discover that actually the strawberry leaf is connected with the Christian religion, so it's possibly more likely to be that. Strawberries can also be found in the Elysian fields of Greek myths and in the paintings of Hieronymus Bosch. In his triptych, The Garden of Earthly Delights, in the middle painting, to the right of the centre, is a figure who can only be described as hugging an enormous strawberry. There are various other figures within the middle painting, offering up enormous strawberries the size of your head, and in fact at the back, towards the left, there is a gathering of many people around a strawberry which is worthy of a Roald Dahl story. I've included a link to the painting in the show notes so that you can while away the hours spotting the strawberries within it. Interestingly enough, this triptych of paintings is thought to depict the Garden of Eden on the left, man's life and lusty ways in the middle, moving through to what ultimately leads to the Last Judgment on the right. The strawberries all seem to be firmly in the lusty ways panel, not in any way the saintly panel as might be implied by the strawberries' association with the Christian faith and the Virgin Mary. As is always the way with folklore, myth and legend, just a tiny bit of mixed messaging there. However, as you might expect with a lusty ways panel, as it shall now be known, strawberries are very much connected with love and have been since the Romans. They appear in the Roman myth of Aphrodite and Adonis. Aphrodite's mortal lover is Adonis, and when he dies, her tears mix with his blood, and where those tears fall, grow strawberries. A more contemporary association with love is through songs and music, and the strawberry often appears in songs as a representation of love or as the fleeting aspects of it. In story, they also appear as an indication of seasons, and there are several stories that use the motif of a girl who is sent out into the wood to find unseasonal strawberries, very often in the winter, and in some cases in a paper dress. It is the Grimm brothers' version of this tale that I'm going to share with you for this episode. This tale is number 13 in the collection and appears in the original 1812 version of the tales, and subsequent versions right up until the last full collection was published in 1857. There are many motifs and archetypes to spot along the way within this story. The bareness of winter, the impossible task, the jealous stepmother, the ungrateful sister, the enchanted queen, and of course the loyalty of kings. It is very much of its day. As in many of these German and European folk tales, the women are represented as either kind and beautiful or ugly and wicked, and there's not a lot in between, not a lot of grey, shall we say. It's very much black and white. You'll find more grey in the Welsh and Celtic stories because they represent that these qualities often live within us in unison, so we can be kind and beautiful and ugly and wicked and be the same person. It has been argued with these stories, though, that these two representations, whilst being separate people, so separate daughters or separate sisters, they are in fact representations of the light and dark sides of ourselves. So whilst initially you might look at these representations of women as being very black and white, it may simply be that they're representing the same duality of self within someone as two people instead of just one, as they do in the Celtic stories. Anyway, I digress, and I will let you decide as the story goes on. This story is known as The Three Little Men in the Woods, or sometimes The Three Little Gnomes in the Woods, and this is how it goes. A long time ago, there was a man who had unfortunately lost his wife, as often these stories start. He lived alone with his daughter. He often wondered if his daughter would benefit from a mother figure, but they seemed to get along okay. The daughter was happy, she was well looked after, and she was loved. But there was always a bit of muttering in the village about how she really did need a mother, and he really did need a wife. One day he just got fed up with these mutterings and decided that he would let fate choose whether or not he should have a wife. He took off his boot, which had an enormous hole in the sole of it. He handed it to his daughter and he said, "Take the boot up into the rafters, up into the loft of the house. Hang the boot on a nail and fill it full of water. If the water pours out of the boot, then I shall not marry. If the water holds within the boot, well, then I shall marry." The daughter, who is extremely diligent and biddable, did exactly that. She went up to the loft, she hung the boot on the nail, and she filled it full of water. Somehow, the pressure of the water held the hole in the sole of the boot closed, and not one drop escaped from that boot. When she went downstairs to tell her father didn't quite believe her, and went upstairs to the loft to look for himself. Yes, indeed, the boot was still full of water and had not lost one drop. And so it was that he married. He married a woman who already had a daughter and had lost her husband, and they got on very well. She was not adverse to helping him on the farm, and the daughter, well, although slightly lazier than his own daughter, was not unpleasant. Time moved on. The weeks became months and the months became years. And, well, a jealousy grew within the stepmother. This jealousy grew from the way that the father looked at his own daughter and did not look that way at the stepdaughter. The way he always favoured that daughter, and the way that daughter's eyes lit up every time he came home. She wanted that bond for her own stepdaughter, but she knew that it would never really be there. And so, eventually, a jealousy and perhaps even a hate festered within her. This soon became a need for vengeance of some kind, and one particularly cold, dark winter, she came up with a plan to rid herself of her husband's daughter. She sat by the fire one evening, making a perfect paper dress for the daughter. She then called the daughter in and told her that she had a taste for strawberries, and that she would take this paper dress and the basket, and she would go out into the woods, and she would find enough tiny wild strawberries to fill that basket. And if she did not, she was not allowed to return home. Of course, the daughter pointed out that this was a paper dress and that she would surely freeze to death, and that there were no strawberries at this time of year anywhere, or if there were, they would be deep beneath the snow, and there was no way of her finding them. But the stepmother would hear nothing of it, and she insisted that she should go out into the cold to find the strawberries. The daughter had no choice. Her father would not reason with the stepmother, and so it was that she put on the paper dress and she took the basket and went out into the woods. It was a cold day. The wind was from the north. It blew straight through the paper dress, and the bramble thorns grabbed at it. She wandered further and further into the woods until she got to a place that she had never been before, and there was a little clearing and a little cottage in the middle of that clearing with little lights in the window. And as she approached, she saw 3 little men who were tending to their garden at the front of the house. She greeted them politely and smiled as best she could, even though she was frozen to the bone. They asked her what she was doing out there in that little paper dress with the basket, and she explained the impossible task that her stepmother had given her. They were so taken with this young girl and how she had been so polite, even though she was clearly desperately cold, that they told her she could go round to the back of the cottage, where there were some wild strawberries still growing. They had been sheltered from the winter there, and they would be easily picked. She should fill her basket if she wished, and then come in by the fire. Once she had finished filling the basket, she did go in and warm herself by the fire, as the 3 little men had suggested, and as she was talking to them, they told her that they had bestowed her with gifts. The first one said that each day she would become more beautiful than she was the day before. The second told her that every time she spoke, gold coins would fall from her mouth. And the third, well, he said that one day a king would come and visit her and want her to be his wife, and she would become queen. Well, she was overjoyed with these gifts, and when she went to thank them, indeed, gold coins did fall from her mouth. She hurried on home, barely feeling the cold this time, for she had a full basket of strawberries, and her stepmother, well, she could be nothing but overjoyed, especially with the gold that now fell from her mouth. When the girl came through the front door, the stepmother was astonished that her plan had not come to pass and that the girl had not frozen to death. Instead, she had returned with a full basket of strawberries. When she asked where she had found the strawberries, of course, when the girl replied, gold coins started to fall from her mouth. She could not believe her luck that now she had a daughter, not only who could find strawberries in winter, but who produced gold just by speaking. She asked her how this had come to pass, and she told her about the 3 little men. Well, as the days wore on and the girl did indeed get more beautiful and did indeed continue to speak gold, she realised that the third one would of course come to pass at some point. And so it was that she wondered what her own daughter might have bestowed upon her, should she go and find those little men in the woods. The following winter, she made her daughter a fur coat, and she gave her a basket and told her exactly what she needed to do, that she needed to go to the middle of the woods and find that little cottage and hope that those little men were there and be as polite and kind as she possibly could be. Well, listener, I think we all know how that went. Not so well. The little men were not at all taken in by the deception. They realised that this daughter was in no way as good-hearted as the first. They told her that her gifts would be that her fur coat would feel like the paper dress they had sent her sister out in, that she would become uglier each day, and that she would die a miserable death. Terrified, the daughter returned to her mother, and she told her of what had happened. The days turned into weeks and turned into months. The younger daughter did marry a king, and she became queen. And the older daughter, well, things did come to pass. She did become uglier each day, and as the winter set in once more, unfortunately, she became ill and died. Not long after, her daughter died, so did her husband, and she was left miserable and alone. The mother, in her grief, was consumed by anger, and she went to her younger daughter, the queen, in the hope that she would be able to bring vengeance on the 3 little men in the wood. Of course, the queen would not. The little men had been very good to her, but she did offer her stepmother a place in the palace, with rooms of her own and anything she could possibly wish for. The queen took those rooms, but that anger still lived in her heart. Another year passed, and the queen became pregnant, and she soon gave birth to a prince. When she was weak and lying in her confinement, the stepmother lifted her from her bed and threw her out the window and into the river that surrounded the castle. She then told the king the next day that his wife had died in childbirth. Again, time passed on. In the river there appeared a little white duck. And one day that little white duck swam up and through the drain in the kitchen. The kitchen boy, on his own in the kitchen late at night, was quite surprised to see the little white duck, and even more surprised when the duck spoke to him. "Are my guests all sound asleep?" said the duck. The kitchen boy could do nothing but reply, "Yes, indeed, you can't hear a peep," he said. "How about that baby of mine?" said the duck. "He's asleep and doing just fine," said the kitchen boy. With that, the duck shapeshifted into what looked like the queen, although the kitchen boy knew she was dead. He thought maybe he was seeing a ghost, and so ignored the fact that she walked up the stairs and up to the child's room and fed the baby. She then came back down the stairs and changed herself back into a duck and went back down into the drain. This happened a few more times. Over time, the duck and the boy talked, and the duck explained what had happened, but that the king would never believe it. However, she did say there was a way to lift the curse, and that if she waited for the king on the threshold by the front gates, then if he was to bring his sword and wave it 3 times over the duck, well, then she would change back into her corporeal form as the queen. The kitchen boy, who was obviously very keen to see the queen back with her king and justice done, went and told the king. The king, thankfully, still had magic in his soul, and he believed what the kitchen boy was saying. He went down to the gate that morning, and he did swing his sword 3 times over the head of the duck, and once more his wife was restored to him. Now his wife, the queen, could confirm what it was that the stepmother had done, and so it was that the king cast his wife's mother out into the forest, so that the forest may decide what her fate would be. And well, if she has not yet died, well then she is still wandering that woods. And if you ever see her, now you know her story. Thanks for joining me for this berry-filled episode. As I mentioned in the intro, for more folklore and stories you can subscribe to my Substack. Just hop on over to Substack and search for Cerridren's Cauldron, or use the link in the show notes. For this episode, the extras for paid subscribers include a recipe for strawberry salsa, which has gone down a treat in our household, a short audio with a whistle-stop tour of some of my favourite story collectors, of which the Grimm brothers are one, a written version of the folklore included with this podcast, and a link to a Spotify playlist, which includes a variety of strawberry-themed music. As well as Substack, you can find me on Instagram as @dd_storyteller and on Facebook as DD Storyteller. I hope to see you there, as I'd love to tell you another story. Until next time, toodle pip!